Yay, what a wonderful gospel. They're not exactly words of comfort to us today, are they? Especially when we have catastrophic fires in Australia, catastrophic flooding in Venice, and catastrophic flooding in England, earthquakes in Indonesia, and ever-increasing impact of climate change. And we haven't even gone to wars and insurrections. We hear these things were happening at Luke's time, they are happening still, so we might want to invoke scriptural wisdom and say, well, there's nothing new under the sun. But it never offers us a lot of reassurance, because in our day and time, surely these things are unprecedented, surely they are worse than ever. But let us remember, Luke was speaking into a particular context. Vernon Robbins remarks in Luke's account of Jesus' speech, Jesus says that arrests and persecution, trials, betrayal by family members, and hatred against them will all occur before the sequence of turmoil that leads to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, which, Vernon writes, the author knows occurred in 70 CE, about 20 years before this gospel was put together. So we might understand today's gospel as an historic narrative of a struggling and persecuted religious movement. Luke's gospel words are being spoken into a religious context, into a community in a particular place and time, a community of people whose actions defied dominant systems, who gave first allegiance to a lord other than the Caesar of one system, a people who defied their religious system when it resisted inclusion for all, unless they did some sort of legitimating right of entry. This context is not our religious context. Our lives and our livelihoods as Christians in this country, in New Zealand, are not in peril because of our religious allegiance. Unfortunately, some other faiths still are. The greater problem for our religious community, for existence into the future, is not persecution. The greater peril to our existence into the future is a societal lack of interest. Our context is one of religious indifference. I remember it being said of teenagers in families when they were often getting some support because their teenagers were being, well, just impossible, as only teenagers can be. One of the most powerful things that they do, teenagers and family systems, is nothing. What can you do? When you have something to fight against, when you have an existence to fight for, a cause beyond you to rally to, it gives you impetus and energy. But when there's nothing, when there's no apparent movement, either toward or away, it's hard to know what to do. I was interested to read Barbara Brown Taylor's words recently. She says, I understand the anxiety of mainline Christians who are watching congregations dwindle and age and seminaries close. It is hard to watch the wells from which you once drew living water dry up. It is awful to watch people go away, leaving the dead to bury the dead. So awful that it is natural to try and find something else to blame. Blame the culture for shallowing the human mind. Blame the megachurches for peddling prosperity. Blame the world for leaving the church behind. There is, she says, some truth to all of these charges, which is why they generate so much energy. At the same time, they obscure the last truth any of us wants to confront, which is that our mainline Christian lives are not particularly compelling these days. There is nothing about us that makes people want to know where we are getting our water. Our rose has lost its fragrance. Today, as we hear the gospel, we hear how it makes sense in and to a particular religious community in its context and time. It is a source of reassurance and hope for them. We hear it now in a religious community in a very different context. For this gospel to be a gospel and a source of reassurance and hope for us, we need to break it open beyond its religious confines. We have an enormous resource here, one that has withstood the test and the testing of time. We are the bearers of this in our time. It is not just for us. It is given as a resource for the life of the world. How do we speak this good news beyond our walls? We live in the same creation as Luke's community, a world that is vulnerable to natural disasters. So we recognize this world, although I think we have done much to distort the balance of creation since then, so everything seems to happen more often and at a greater scale. So today's gospel speaks of the real-life world we know, where natural disasters are a part of. The same thing that frighten and bewilder us. Today's gospel also declares there is more to the life of the world than the appearance of things. Hope and deeper wisdom reside here also. Do we think this is the way things are? Do we think we can recognize hope or deeper wisdom? What does it look like? Or perhaps, are we willing to recognize these things in people we least expect? And if we recognize them, are we willing to share our space or create space for such people to stand and to stand with them, to empower them to speak into wisdom, the wisdom our world needs? People like Greta Thunberg, whose passionate speaking of truth to power reminds us of who we used to be. People who open our hearts and minds and wills to learn in new ways, for surely the old ways no longer resonate as they once did. Is it not true that on the world stage daily we see truth being sacrificed on the altar of convenience? Where are our voices in this increasingly uncontested space? We worry about our continuity of religious lineage, but are we brave enough to dig down and ask what it actually contributes into the world, to accept that our fragrant rose that was beautiful for us has lost its perfume to those outside? Because there was a time when our hearts burned with passion and we were stirred and we spoke and we acted boldly against the injustice of apartheid, the coming of nuclear power to this land, when we joined the hikoi of hope and we spoke and acted for peace and we advocated for the LGBTQI community and for those who need to live a living wage. I wonder what part the Jesus story had in our passion, in our conviction, in our declaring that things should be another way. Can you remember what that sounded like in your own ears? What it felt like? What it tasted and touched like? I know we're older now, but does that passion still not burn? Have we not the wisdom and resources to do it differently? How will we bring it to life today in our world when religion is not something people resonate with? With all the challenges of our world and to our faith in the ways we've known, have we actually stopped believing what's possible along the way? Or is it that we've outgrown our certainty? That the old ways that used to reassure us and inform us have lost their luster? Some years ago, somebody said to me when I was challenged in a community I was in, if no one holds up a mirror to reflect back to you who you are, you begin to disappear. What would it be like to hold up a mirror one to another here? Or have a mirror held up to reflect back to you who you are? Would you see an image of someone alive with divine presence? Would you see reflected back one willing to risk the radical possibility of living aligned with God in and for the world? Would we see it reflected in what we do and what we think and how we pray, how we care, how we engage, how we insist on the divine priority for all of life? It may require that we make space and give way and be opened and be willing to be changed, not to race here and there looking for some certainty to secure a privilege at the cost of others, but rather to hold that fierce faith lightly, to live deeply and sincerely as those beloved of God. For we know and insist this is the way things are. Creation is beloved into being, and we can align ourselves with that in our acting and in our living in the world. Does this not resonate with Isaiah's prophetic vision? Those years ago, when the people of New Orleans were rebuilding their city, Rowan Williams spoke to them reflecting on this passage from Isaiah, and he asked, "What in biblical terms makes a great city a godly city? Is it businesses? Its arts? Its educational system? Its social welfare? Its commercial services?" No, he says, not really. What makes a great and godly city is that it is a safe place for old people to sit and children to play in the streets. What a long way we are from that great and godly city in most of the cities we inhabit in our present day. When we start asking about profit and success in the city of God, we are saying our fellow citizens are there to be celebrated. They are there for our gratitude. They are there for our life. And to see the old and the young, the people who are not necessarily part of the system of profit, the people who are not going to be useful to us for any particular reason, to see them there secure in the city, isn't that a sign of the health, the life, and the godliness of a community? A place where the old and the young are valued for what they are. The children who have time to play and the old who have time to sit. There are many forces in our society who would like to see them relegated out of sight. So we wouldn't have to think about that terribly frightening fact that leisure, enjoying who we are and who each other is in the presence of God, is what we should be spending eternity doing. And the old and the young will help us remember that and help us get used to it, however frightening it is. We do live in frenetic times that prioritize busyness over being. The news, if not full of disaster and hopelessness, tells of people in power playing fast and easy with truth claims and what is real. As people of faith in our time, we seem to have forgotten we have a place, and we seem to have lost the confidence to step into it. There is work for us to do. We are to engage in the industry of life, but let us not make an idol of it. Let's also leave space for reflection, to discern wisdom and nurture to life, and nurture that wisdom to life as we engage in our activity. Let us learn anew what it is to be a people and a person of faith in a world despairing of hope, to speak and act that into being genuinely as we form relationships with people who are who they are and the context they are in. Then maybe we will not act out of fear when all these things around us are happening, but we may learn to trust. We learn to align ourselves with and allow for a deeper wisdom to prevail. Learn how to value, to appreciate, and to enjoy who we are and the gift of who the other is in a world that we say is redolent with divine presence.